All right, anyway, so there's a Saturday event if you want to go to it, worth extra credit, and there are summer jobs. It'll pay you a few $1,000 to teach high school students about security, so email Irvin if you're interested in that. We do need people for that. All right. And MMM says it crashed again. That's not good. Now let me know if other people have troubles. All right. It looks pretty good here. Still good. Okay. Well, some people are seeing it. Hopefully it's good enough. The system seems a little messed up tonight. You can see and hear me. Yeah, okay. Well, I think there's some flakiness in it. Anyway, this is the wrong class. That's not going to help. There we are. So some person said they were ready to do their early presentation tonight. Mitch Sands, good. Yep, okay, good. And anyway, let's see if I can talk about the chapter, or if everything's going to crash and burn on me. All right, so we're here. This is more of information security program development. So we're just going to talk about risk management, risk treatments, and audits. All right, and there's the rest of the chapter comes later. All right, so risk management is the process of identifying risks and deciding whether it's worth doing anything about them, and if appropriate, implementing treatments to lower the risk down to an acceptable level. So you determine your risk appetite, which is how much risk you want to accept. Companies like Facebook have a high risk appetite because they really want to keep bringing out new features really fast, and they like to keep the developers enthusiastic, so they say move fast and break things. We don't mind risk, we just want exciting new features. Banks are, of course, completely different. Banks want stability and reliability and no mistakes, and nobody really cares if they don't have any new features. They just want them to keep the old features working reliably, so they have a very low risk appetite. So when you find a risk, these are the 4 things you can do. You can accept it, which means do nothing about it and just let that bad thing happen. Or you can mitigate it, which is you do something to lower the risk. Or transfer it to somebody else by outsourcing part of your business or buying insurance. Or you can avoid the risk by changing your business process so the risky activity no longer happens at all. Those are the general things you can do to a risk. So the risk management program, you've got to choose the goals of it, the part of the company covered. Then you have to determine the people involved. Someone with right authority has to be in charge. You have to have the roles and responsibilities of the staff and enough resources to implement your policy procedures, and then you define policies, processes, procedures, and records. And so you've got a cycle here. You identify your assets, you figure out what risks threaten those assets, you apply treatments, and then you just go around and around the circle. You consider your assets again, see what risks are still remain, and what treatments, and you never get to stop because things keep changing. The threats keep changing, the attacks keep changing, your assets keep changing, so you just have a cycle of steady improvement to stay on top of it. So ISACA has a risk IT framework. This is risk government. It'll integrate with your enterprise risk management. You evaluate your risks, and then you respond to it. And remember, governance in general is management making sure that a business process is operating correctly. So, in the first place, just finding your assets is where a lot of companies stop. If you ask a typical company, how many copies are there of your all-important data, they don't even know. People have got it on thumb drives, in their Gmail account, in their Dropbox. Some employees have it on their home machines. They don't actually know how many copies there are of the important file and where they are, and that's not good. You can't protect something in a circumstance like that. So this is the first thing, just inventorying your assets. The hardware assets like your computers and such, and also your software assets, like the confidential data from customers you're protecting and your proprietary designs and plans and stuff. So now you do risk analysis. In the simplest term, a risk is the probability of a bad thing happening times the impact if that bad thing happens. But often you don't even bother with any math. You just qualitatively rate it as high, medium, and low, things like that. So you have to determine threats. Threats are just bad things that might happen, and impacts are how much damage it would do if that bad thing did happen. And vulnerabilities are weaknesses that make it more likely that a threat will inflict damage. So threat analysis is just like scary headline in the newspaper. Something bad might happen. Your employees might get sick. The building might burn down. Russia might attack us with a cyber attack. Those things are threats. A threat is just a bad thing that might happen. So a threat alone is information, but it's not enough information to guide an intelligent response. You must turn it into a risk analysis by determining how likely it is that that threat will in fact impact your business. So all these are bad things that can happen: storms, labor strikes, malware, hardware failures, and your employees making errors, which is usually the largest thing. Most problems are caused not by external attacks, but by your own employees making mistakes. So you can group the threats together by geographic location or logical for the type of asset affected, or other kinds of analysis. Perhaps based on each highly valued asset. There's various ways to organize your thinking to try to list the threats. Unfortunately, very little information is really available about how likely a threat is to hurt you and how many dollars it would cost if it did hurt you. Every business is different, and so it's a problem. Now, there are some parts of risk where this has been done. For example, insurance companies have been spending a long time figuring out how long you're likely to live, how likely you are to get sick, how likely you are to get in a car accident, and they can sell insurance pretty well because they can calculate pretty well how likely these things are to happen. But cyber risks are just guesses because it keeps changing so fast. New attacks keep coming out, the technology keeps changing, and every company is different. So if you just say, suppose we get a breach and somebody steals the data, how many dollars would it cost us per record? And nobody even knows that. It can be anywhere from like 2 cents per record up to like $200 or 1 cent. Enormously different numbers have happened in different breaches. Not sure as low as 2 cents. I know $200 is the top, and I think $1 or $2 is the bottom of known breaches. Extremely wide range. So I don't know how anybody sells cyber risk insurance. I don't know how you could possibly decide how much premium to charge. So here's vulnerabilities, like if you're missing patches, you don't have antivirus, you have old hardware or old software, weak passwords, unnecessary services, misconfigurations, incomplete monitoring of logs, weak session management, physical insecurities like building doors that are left hanging open or people can follow other people through. These are all vulnerabilities, weaknesses in your system. If you want to rank vulnerabilities, as far as network vulnerabilities and computer technology vulnerabilities, there's the CVE system that rates them on a score from 0 to 10. And you see there, they come at all different levels. The ones that get the headlines are the 9s and 10s, which are the ones that require low skill to attack and give someone complete control of your server over the internet, remote attacks. Those ones get headlines and people freak out, and there's a lot of lesser vulnerabilities out there too. So the probability that the threat will in fact occur and harm your business is there, and then the impact analysis is how much harm it would do if they did get in. And so here's where you have to decide. If you say you have a server with a SQL injection, and there's a possibility that an attacker will exploit the SQL injection and execute SQL commands on the database, the next question is, how much would that really hurt the business? And that requires how important is the data on that server, how likely is it that they would move from that server to another server, and so on. So your impact should be in terms of business process. Inability to process customer support calls is in terms of business. Inability to authenticate users is not helpful to management. And this is something it took me a long time to understand when I was a tech worker at a business, is that my role was to translate technical details into actionable business intelligence for management above me. If you are the technical expert, you know what it means to authenticate users, and you have to explain that to the managers above you in business terms. What would that do to us? How would that hurt us? You wouldn't be able to have customer support calls. Well, now I understand. Now I can figure out how many dollars per week that would cost us and decide what to do about it. I didn't understand that that would be the best way for me to communicate with management at the time, but you should understand that. That's very important information. So, qualitative analysis is how you usually start out. You just rate them as high, medium, low risks, or a 1 to 5 or 1 to 10 scale. And then if you can actually boil these things down to numbers, you can make a quantitative risk analysis, although it tends to be pretty much just a guess, like a projection of future income. So if you have an asset value, like how much would it cost to replace this, which is easy for things like physical destruction of a car or a building, and then exposure factor is what percentage of the asset's value would be lost if this bad thing happened. So you have the single loss expectancy, which is the asset value times the exposure factor. Now, if this bad thing happens once, that's how many dollars you're going to lose. Your annualized rate of occurrence is how many of those bad things will happen per year. So if you multiply the single loss expectancy times the annualized rate of occurrence, you get the annualized loss expectancy. This is how many dollars per year you expect to lose from this threat. And if you can get it there, then you can compare that to the amount of dollars it would cost to implement some kind of defense. And you can make a logical decision if, in fact, you trust these numbers. All right, business continuity planning is planning to survive a big disaster like a malware infection or a building burning down. And that's the same story. And risk analysis is part of preparing for business continuity to survive a disaster. So, high impact events are the events that would in fact threaten to kill the business entirely. So these are ones where you must plan your response to the risk treatment, and you must make sure you're communicating with top executive management because you're making a decision that affects the survival of the business. So this should be part of business continuity planning and disaster recovery planning, the big scary things. So there are standards for this. There's a NIST standard and there's an ISO international standard for risk management and risk analysis. And so risk treatment. The security manager might decide about risk treatment, but the problem is if they do, they're likely to affect the rest of the company, and this is where you get the famous unpopularity of the security team, where they're called Dr. No. The security management will just say, well, you can't use this cloud service. You can't use Dropbox because it's not safe. And he just makes a decision like that, and a bunch of the rest of the company really wants to use Dropbox, and they feel like this guy is just ruining their life. And that's why what you ought to do is you ought to have a steering committee where you have stakeholders from the parts of the business, and before you implement some risk treatment, you talk to these people and find out if that risk treatment will mess up their business process, and choose a risk treatment which will lower the risk and also not impair the business process. If you have an undefined, if nobody even knows whose job it is to make risk treatments, then you don't have any effective security management. And this is something I failed to understand when I used to be a white hatter. I used to do things like go to college websites and find vulnerabilities and then send emails and call people on the telephone and try to tell them you have a vulnerability. And what I would typically find is nobody knows who I should talk to, nobody knows who could fix it, nobody even knows what I'm talking about. There's nobody in charge. It's down in this category. The security posture of the college is so low that they do not understand what to do with a risk. And that's where people start, but you're not going to make it into the big time with that kind of incompetent management. You need to move to a higher level of security posture if you want to become a larger, more important business and get contracts with governments and large companies. You have to get more professional about how you handle risk. So risk mitigation lowers the risk. You have something you're afraid of, like virus infections, so you do something like put on antivirus, but nothing is ever perfect, so the risk of virus infection does not go down to zero. It goes down, but not all the way to zero. You have residual risk remaining. So risk transfer is where you transfer it to a third party by buying insurance, for example, cyber risk insurance. You will have to carefully read the policy. A lot of cyber risk insurance and insurance of all kinds has funny little exclusions. So when you actually try to file a claim, they'll say, oh, no, the situation that affected you is not exactly the one covered by the policy. So that's a problem. And risk avoidance. This happened to Dick's Sporting Goods. There was another mass shooting in America, and the owner of Dick's said, we're going to just stop selling guns. We were selling guns, we were making part of our money from selling guns, but I've decided that is just too risky. Selling guns creates all this bad public relations for us, and we're just going to get rid of the guns and not sell guns anymore. We're just going to sell, ski outfits and roller skates and stuff, but no more guns. That's risk avoidance. You change your business to just no longer do the activity, and that's one option. Well, sometimes it's better to transfer risk if you just have to decide. Transferring risk involves paying for the insurance, and you have to decide if what you're getting isn't worth what you're paying for it. Yeah. All right. And then risk acceptance. You just decide, who cares, just let it happen. One common example is your employees probably make some personal copies on the copiers. And technically they shouldn't do that, but in fact, trying to put a camera in the copy room and detect that is just going to be a lot of bother, and the total amount of money you're losing from this is very small, so it's probably better to just let that bad thing happen and not waste a lot of time or energy trying to prevent it. And you do that when the impact of this bad thing is small and when the cost of mitigating it is high. So you have residual risk. After your treatment, there's still some risk left, so now you may decide that even the remaining risk is still too high and you have to go through another round of risk management to try to find a way to lower it further. Then there's compliance risk. You may be running your business, making money, but in fact, you're breaking the rules. You're not in fact obeying the PCI DSS rules, so when they come to the audit, they're going to discover that you're out of compliance and there will be punishment for that. So that's an issue. You might have lawsuits, fines, sanctions, interruptions in your business, so that is a compliance risk. You have a risk ledger, which just records what you've done, how you identified risks, what you found about what the affected assets, how you measured the risk, what treatment you implemented, and how effective you think that treatment is. This is all you record all your risk decisions, and then you can refer to this and use it to help guide you as you move forward to deal with future risks. People might start out with a spreadsheet, and when you get bigger and more professional, you'll need to get a GRC tool. There's special software just for this purpose. All right, and then audits. Security audits check to see whether safeguards are in place and working. So you tell your employees that they have to not put corporate files on their personal devices, and they have to lock their screen when they walk away from your desk, and you have to have some test to see if that's really happening. So you have a security audit, which is a formal process of inspecting things, interviewing people, looking at records, examining computer systems and firewalls and everything to see if they're in fact configured as they should be. There's also a less formal process called a security review, which is like a lighter version of an audit. So an audit is a systematic process. You can get certified as an auditor, and then you basically have a checklist of these things to check, and you make sure you've checked every one, and you can do an audit, and then you can do another audit later, or an audit of another company, and it's repeatable and reliable. You've checked all these things. So you interview personnels, and you deliver a written opinion at the end, stating the results of your audit. We found that the business was out of compliance for these reasons, or it was in compliance, and then of course there are details. You can have internal audits from inside your company or external audits, and as I often think of when I see this with business, I worked in a financial business and we had very strong internal audits, and I did some of them. We were very careful to make sure that we were correctly handling the money inside, and when our external customers audited us, they were very happy and very impressed because we could show them that we did in fact very carefully make sure that we did the right thing, which I was happy with. CISA is the certification if you want to become an auditor. It's a valuable certificate. It's a lot like CISM. We have written a class, but it hasn't been taught yet due to the chaos at the college. But hopefully, one of these days you'll be able to get this at City College. You can go take it elsewhere, though. The CISA is a good cert to have. You had to do a HIPAA compliance audit. Oh, yes. Oh, no, it's not an easy task at all. One of my students took on the job of bringing a company that had never been up to PCI DSS, and it took a whole year. Now, those big compliance frameworks are big and complicated, and I'm sure HIPAA also, yeah. All right, so you got to plan your audit. You determine the purpose of your audit, like you're trying to comply with HIPAA. Then the scope, which is what part of the business that you're testing. And then you have risk analysis, you have your procedures, there are some resources required for your audit. You're going to have to go to people and say you must prepare a report from your department listing all the servers you're using and all the firewalls and whatever else you're doing, and then you have a plan for it. It will take time. So you determine whether there are controls where there should be and whether the controls are in fact effective and working. And this is typically tied to a compliance standard or a legal obligation. It may also be after an incident. You had a security incident, and as part of resolving the incident, you now do an audit to try to see what's going on here and how do we tighten things up around here so this doesn't happen again. And all right, so you can have an operational audit, checking how your business operation works, financial audit, following the money, integrated audit, information system audits, administration, or compliance. These are just various different ways to look at the business, different parts of the business that you might be auditing. A forensic audit is an audit preparing for a lawsuit. As you know, forensic examination, the most common kind you see on TV, is where cops go to a crime scene and pick up blood spatters and bullet casings and stuff because they're figuring out what crime was done there. But it's the same thing when you can do a forensic audit of the finances of the company. You're trying to get a legal document that will go to court making a statement about the findings, preparing for a lawsuit. If you outsource to third parties, and everybody does, then the third parties will undergo audits, and then you would be more likely to trust them if you are able to audit them. For example, if you're using Amazon Web Services for your servers, like almost everybody is, the small customers probably just trust Amazon to live up to their terms of services, but the big ones might in fact audit them to see if they're in fact doing what they say they're doing. So there is a standards for attestation engagements, which is an engagement where you are examining a third party to see if your service provider is providing the correct service. So this is the report they prepare and transmit to the customers tied to a standard, and there are standards for this. So you get a document attesting that they are in fact living up to these policies, living up to these standards. So before you do an audit, you examine your processes to figure out what you've got and what work is going to be involved, and then you have an audit methodology. You don't make it up as you go along. You should have a formal step-by-step checklist so that each audit is repeatable and fair. So you have determine your subject, determine the goal, the type of your audit, the scope to be covered, and then plan it. These are phases you go through. At the end, you'll have a statement of work, not at the end, at the beginning, which states the cost, just a statement like any contract for business. So you probably have to get the client to approve this, to pay the cost and invest the necessary resources to provide their end of it. And then you got your procedures, people to interview, what you're going to ask them, what documents you need, what tools you're going to need, how you're going to sample things, because in financial audits, you don't check every financial transaction. You do something like the largest ones and then maybe 1% of the others chosen at random, something like that. How you're going to archive the data and how you're going to evaluate the data. Those are your procedures. You have communication plan. When you request evidence from people, like you ask a department of the company to submit a report listing what they've been doing, status reports to report the progress of the audit to management, and meetings, and information so they can contact you and you can contact them if questions or delays come up. So you make your report, and you're going to know how to prepare a report. It has to meet audit standards, and it has to identify the parties. These reports are often going to end up going to court or be used in other legal proceedings, so it's a serious matter. So you wrap it up, you deliver your report, you have a closed meeting to discuss the report because it's typically confidential. It's going to involve discussing problems at the company and security risks at the company, and so it's not public information. Then you collect your invoice, and of course there's non-disclosure agreements. You don't tell other people outside the company what you found. And when you're done, you follow up with your company. If you want to be a good contractor, you'd follow up with them to make sure things are okay, establish a dialogue, discuss things with the management. This reminds me a lot of what pen testers have to do. If you take a hostile attitude, nobody will want to hire you again. You have to make it clear, I am not here to harm your business. I am here to help your business achieve your goals by achieving compliance with this standard. And I, talk to them, make sure they understand you're a partner and you're not just, like a cop giving them a traffic ticket to ruin their day and then driving away. You're there to help them fix the problem. All right. And so you have evidence to back up your audit. You have what you have observed, the notes, the correspondence, information you might have got from other audits, the business documentation and records. These are all part of your audit reports. These are the evidence. So good evidence is independent of the provider. It includes the qualifications of the person that provided it to you, and it should be objective and relevant in time. And when you're observing personnel, you should watch them perform their real task, be aware of their skills, how aware they are of security, and whether they are in fact staying in their lane. Segregation of duties is designed to make sure that an important task cannot be done by one employee alone. It has to be performed by an employee and then checked and signed off on by a second employee, and observe whether that in fact is really done, or if people are doing two people's jobs and just pretending to have it inspected by management when it's not. So you can have your self-assessment. You have, you start, say here, identify and assess risks. Then you have controls to limit those risks. Then you have a questionnaire to see what's going on, analyze it, and from that you can decide if you have to adjust things. And you can have workshops to train your staff if it turns out that they need advanced training to improve processes. And you've got various levels of training, awareness training and workshops to train people at different levels so they learn how to do things better. All right, let's take a look at the Kahoot. Good, looks like my computer's working okay now. $160 4B. Okay. Seem to have lost the music somehow. Well, there's always something. Well, at least my microphone's working. But my browser seems to have lost the ability to play sound. Well, we can live without the sound. This is CNET 160. Seems like I still have a few problems in my system here. All right. That looks all right. All right, such is life. All right, I'll give it a few more seconds to see if any more people are coming. All right. Okay, if you have a low impact and a low probability, what's the right treatment? Yep, just accept it. Just let it happen. All right. A bad thing that might happen without any measure of its significance. What is that? That's a threat. A threat is just a scary thing that might happen. By itself, you can't plan a mitigation straight from a threat. You have to go through risk analysis first. But a threat is just a list of bad things that might happen. All right, what kind of audit prepares you to go to court? That's forensics. Good. You'll have a report that goes to court, a forensic report, which is used to determine something having to do with the court decision. All right. So who should decide your risk treatment? Yep, the steering committee is the best answer. All right. So we've got NMM. I think I might know who that is. I'm not sure. I might have seen that before. And DA, I don't know if that's initials or what. We'll see. And I think that's probably Judy. So the other two, my grader might figure out who you are. If you want to make sure to get your points, you should give me more information. Let me stop this recording.